One of the more insidious things that has happened is the rise of Black organizations that say they want reparations, but under certain conditions. So you see these groups like ADOS, who have really given a lot of us trouble in the reparations struggle. Foundational Black American stuff. And all of this stuff is backed by white conservatives. So it's coming, the opposition of reparations, where it used to come 90% from white folks, is now in blackface in the form of ADOS and FBA and all of these groups. Reparations is when a nation or a group of people acknowledge that they have committed crimes against humanity towards another group. That's the simple definition. You know, reparations have been paid way before the word was coined in World War I. People forget that Haiti paid reparations to France simply because of the fact that, you know, when Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines, you know, overthrew Napoleon's army in Haiti, the white world shut Haiti out. And France said the only way you can get into, you know, back into the world family or whatever is to pay us back, because it's, you know, the enslavers lost a lot of money. You know, and then people ask the question, why is Haiti so poor? Now, that's the first thing you hear. The poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, so forth. So reparations are long before World War I, but it's when a crime against humanity is committed. And as far as I'm concerned, and many, many others, slavery was a crime against humanity. If you have a mass exodus or take a people forcibly out of their homeland, that's a crime against humanity. Medical experiments. Hitler did this during, you know, Jewish Holocaust that occurred during World War II. In this country, you had the same thing. I mean, we know about the Tuskegee experiment, but there were hundreds of experiments. Maybelline, Max Factor, all of these cosmetic companies in the late 40s, right after World War II and early 1950s, they went to Pennsylvania and smeared these concoctions on the skin of Black people. Because when the guy from Max Factor, I believe it was, saw all of the Black people, they said, boy, we have acres of skin that we can experiment on. So these are crimes against humanity. The problem with America is that it's built on a bunch of lies. The whole idea of America, you know, land of the free, home of the brave, everybody has equal opportunity, all of this stuff. Whitecapping, Du Bois coined that term back in the early 1900s, and it was literally the so-called Night Riders or Ku Klux Klan. They would literally steal Black people's land. Most of the land theft in this country had to do with just saying white people wanting Black people's land. And put it in perspective, Black people own roughly 10 million acres of land in 1910. Today we own about 2.5. And see, Black folk think because we own a house, we own land. We don't. Land, I'm talking about actual land. Most of it has just been stolen from us. Du Bois used the term whitecapping to kind of as a metaphor for, you know, the Ku Klux Klan with their white hoods on and taking land from Black people. Well, I mean, the pushback is enormous, you know, and it's coming from some interesting areas. I mean, the first thing, you know, white folks, you know, probably the question that I've been asking, well, didn't that happen a long time ago? So did the stealing of Native American land, you know, and many Native Americans actually got their land back with some conditions, like gambling casinos. We've known that because of these gambling casinos and the money, that health among Native children has improved. White folks will say things like, well, I didn't have anything to do with enslavement. My parents came over on the Mayflower, all of these objections like this. But we pay reparations for the Jewish Holocaust during World War II, and America didn't have anything to really do with that. The idea that somehow we being white Americans, don't have any attachment to enslavement, and that's why I oppose reparations, is ridiculous. One of the more insidious things that has happened in the past probably 8 or 9 years is the rise of Black organizations that say they want reparations, but under certain conditions. So you see these groups like ADOS, who are really giving a lot of us trouble in the reparations struggle. American descendants of slaves. To Brother Tariq Nasheed, who does this color, whatever the name of that series is called, stuff, his foundational Black American stuff. And all of this stuff is backed by white conservatives. White people say, okay, we're gonna make this whole thing about lineage a criterion. Like, in other words, if I can't trace my lineage directly to enslavement, I'm not entitled to reparations. Well, see, we can do that. I can do that. I've been able to trace my father's side back to 1827. But what about Jamal and Pookie on the street corner? They may not have the wherewithal to do that. And it's a trick that Black folk, on behest of white people, have used to try to deny reparations with people. And it's really interesting. I was kind of debating this ADOS person once, and I compared them to like the slave catchers on the roads in Virginia and Alabama and other places, who asked for papers to prove that they could go from one plantation to another. And they got mad at me. But the fact of the matter is that you're asking white institutions, who have oftentimes destroyed Black history, papers, deeds, all of these things, to somehow now prove that you were enslaved or your ancestors were enslaved. So I kind of reject all of that stuff. So it's coming, the opposition of reparations, where it used to come 90% from white folks, is now in blackface in the form of ADOS and FBA and all of these groups. Probably the greatest amount of reparations have been Jewish people, who have made, there's a book called The Holocaust Industry by Michael Finkelstein, and he is, talked about, how it's like an industry. The Japanese, after World War II, and their incarceration by Franklin Roosevelt. So several groups have received reparations. In fact, if you look at it, in this country, the only group that hasn't received reparations have been Black people. That was the longest example of a crime against humanity, enslavement, for over 500 years in the Western Hemisphere. So the press for reparations is old. I've been all over the world, and it's the only thing that ties us together as an African people is all of us know that they did something to us, enslaved us, colonized us, beat us, raped us, castrated us, burned us, and that they owe us something, and they being Europeans. And I'm not just exaggerating this. I think that Francis Welsing and Neely Fuller are two of the greatest Black thinkers that we've produced in the past 100 years. And that's not an exaggeration. You can include Du Bois, of course, and others. But, you gotta ask the question, what is it that why don't white people like black folk? In fact, and feel threatened by almost all people of color. Why? And it's because of the whole idea that white people are a minority. And it's amazing how when I asked that question to a black audience, I said, what percent of the world's population is classified as white? Black folk usually give a huge number. I asked it last night at a meeting, and the sister said, at least 55%. I mean, 2 billion people in this world are Chinese. You throw another billion in, roughly, of African people. It's not that many white people on earth. And so what Neely Fuller did, who was Dr. Welsing's teacher, he said, what are the areas that white people feel most threatened in? And he gave those 9 areas of education, economics, entertainment, law, sex, war, religion. And he talks about those 9 areas that racism is most manifest in people living. What Dr. Welsing did, his student said, why do white people do this? Why is it that white people have issues with black people and people of color in general? And she says it's because of their racial minority. Chuck D, dedicated his album Fear of a Black Planet to Dr. Welsing. And he has that rap in there that says, black man, black woman, black baby. Black man, white woman, black baby. White man, black woman, black baby. And finally, the only way you can produce another white baby, of course, is a white man and a white woman. So this idea, during the civil rights era and even before that, they said they're going to marry our daughters. That's something that threatens them at a very visceral level. They can be annihilated. One of my colleagues at Morgan, Linda Lubert, she's an economist. She said, if the present rate of interracial marriage continues, that there will be no more white people on earth in 600 years. They're just going to disappear. And I think white people know that, and they know it intuitively. So when white people get afraid, they get violent. A lot of people, when they get afraid, they run. So if a bear walked in this room right now, a lot of them, whoa, we got to get out of here. White people say, where's my gun? And I think when white people get frightened, they go after, people. That's why you see the killings of black men and women, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, here in Baltimore, Freddie Gray. You see this because there's a fear of a black planet, as Chuck D says. And that fear is something that goes throughout the world. That racism that white people have, this fear of us, this hatred of us, visceral like idea about being black, it's universal. And the irony of it, like Chuck says, he said, they hate us because they ain't us. Their ideal of a handsome man, tall, dark, and handsome. They can't wait till the sun comes out in the spring so that they can get their suntan. They make their lips, their butts, all of that, so that they look like our women and stuff. So, I mean, as a psychologist, which I am, I'm looking at this thing at a deeper level, the way Francis did. Obama, the first indication I knew that Obama was being constrained and as a victim was when Henry Louis Gates, the guy that teaches at Harvard, got arrested for trying to get into his own house. He had left his key, and the Cambridge, Massachusetts police arrested the dude. And Obama got up there and said that was a stupid thing, and that was the word he used for them to do. The backlash on it was just incredible. And then when Trayvon Martin was killed, he said, if I had had a son, he might have looked like Trayvon when Obama said that. And people got mad, white folks. Black folk knew what he meant. And then, it was almost like he had to deal with this constant thing. I'm a black man and I can't say anything about race. I can't identify, with my people. I can't do any of that because white folks are going to, lock things down. Donald Trump, he can say anything about race. He can call nations, black nations, shithole countries, and nobody says anything. He can point out, there's my African American out in the crowd, like we're a pet or something like that. He can say anything. Black folk can't do that publicly. But a lot of people like Obama, who's, younger than me, of course, he's got to be careful. And it's rare that you see black, especially elected officials, say something that is so black that everybody identifies with it. Obama couldn't do that. And a lot of, black elected officials can't do that. I think black people always elect black politicians to be transformational. Coleman Young in Detroit, Maynard Jackson in Atlanta, Carl Stokes in my hometown of Cleveland. They were transformational politicians. They changed systems. A lot of black elected officials now are just going along with the system. And Francis says that most black people are not trying to oppose the system of white supremacy. They're trying to find a more comfortable place in it. And a lot of us are doing that. And a lot of elected officials are. Obama always had the white gaze over him, as Toni Morrison says, like what are white people going to think about if I say this or if I do this, and I think you got to get rid of that. And it's a risk in getting rid of it, because the system of white supremacy can put the hammer down on you. And they've done that with several of our politicians. Well, there's been a national crisis against black males in general since 1526, since we were first enslaved and brought to this landmass. See, if I was a white supremacist, as Francis said, you got to destroy the black man. Because as she says, in a very psychoanalytic way, she says that they contain the seed that can perpetuate blackness, and so you got to destroy the black man. I mean, again, as a psychologist, I always ask myself, why did black men get castrated when they were being lynched? I mean, I got to look at that as a psychologist. Why would they attack the penis? Why is it that white men say you're not a man until you've had sex with a black woman? Why do they say that? And I'm looking at it as a psychologist, and analyzing it that way. Well, you got to deal with the black man if you're a white supremacist. You got to, frustrate him getting jobs, keep him unemployed, pour drugs in his community so they can sell him, criminalize him at a very young age, all of that stuff. And it's been successful. The system has been successful in doing that. What is even more, insidious is when the system is on autopilot. And racism right now has recruited black people to do those same things to us, so that they can just have hands off, it will produce a Diddy, it will produce people who do things to our own people that perpetuate the system of white supremacy. Neely Fuller talks about the fourth stage of racism being a refinement. of it. And I think racism is refined now. See, when I grew up thousands of years ago, it wasn't refined. We knew who the racists were when King went to the South and Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, this stuff. Now it's harder to tell people, you hear people, black folk, young black people saying, well, we're just all one. It's just one race, the human race. On TV, we see commercials with interracial couples on it. We think everything's going to be all right. And it's not. And I think that the attack against the black man, it's almost like right now, every time I turn on a commercial, you see a white man with a black, woman. It's as if, and subtly, it's like, well, black men can't even have a family, or black people can't have a black family, an intact black family. And that stuff is being steadily fed to us in a variety of ways. So, black boys, when I wrote Warrior Method 20 years ago, as we were saying earlier, I was just tired of being called an endangered species. And see, if a species is in danger, a lion, a rhinoceros, whatever, something is endangering it. And so I wanted to point the finger at what was endangering black males, and it's the system of white supremacy. It's endangering black women as well. So that's why I call it the warrior method. I mean, some people didn't like that title because they said, well, it sounds like you want us to go out and kill somebody. No, I want us to defend each other. There's an Ethiopian word that I put in the new edition of that book called jegna. Wade Nobles brought it to our attention, the psychologist. And a jegna is a man or woman who knows the history of their group, protects their community at the expense of their life, and they're willing to die for their community. And that's what a warrior is. That's what a jegna is. And my argument is that we don't have that many jegnas anymore. I'm talking about the United States. Malcolm was a jegna. Rosa Parks was a jegna. Angela Davis is one. But I don't know who that is right now. Angela's still around. But a lot of us aren't willing to really pick up and say we're going to protect our community at all costs. The early Black Panthers were. The Black Liberation Army was. But again, we don't have that many jegnas in our community nowadays. The never wannabes, I think those are the black folk that are they completely sold out. They're trying to be comfortable in that system of white supremacy, and almost like saying, I've transcended being black, and sometimes, and they're oftentimes the most, the wealthiest and could do the most for us as a group, but they don't. I think I talk about the super slaves. Clarence Thomas comes to mind. This is a powerful black person who's in a position of authority, but uses his or her power to really hurt black people. Candace Owens, I don't. But see, Candace has gotten in trouble because of this Israeli stuff, because she said something about Gaza and stuff like that, and her Jewish backers have kind of done this to her, so she's going to run back to the black community. We have a lot of those. Naeem Akbar calls, that says that the black community is like the rubber band community. He uses that phrase, and we accept everybody. But sometimes we can't do that. We've always had terms like Oreo, and it's interesting that people of color always have terms to describe sellout people in their community. I've got Native American friends who say they call them apples, red on the outside, white on the inside. Asian people call them bananas, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. All of this stuff. So we, people of color in general know they have their sellouts in our community, and we got them in ours as well. We read about some of these historical figures. You take somebody that we all know, like Rosa Parks. People forget it was not only did she get arrested, her life was threatened. That's why she had to move to Detroit to get away from some of the death threats that she was receiving when she was down in Montgomery. I think that the healers are these doctors and dentists that go overboard to do things for our people. The social workers, we tend to not think about them, the ones especially that challenge the system. And then the Black teachers that we have who start homeschooling their children, especially during the pandemic, and forming groups. We always see the politicians, the entertainers, but there's like everyday people that are doing remarkable things to keep our communities together. It's not in the best interest of the system of white supremacy to put these people out in front of everybody. The white way is when you just say, nothing's wrong with the system of education for our children. It's like you put them in, they'll come out okay. They're the ones who would never send their child to a Black school or anything like that. And they think the goal, don't send them to an HBCU like Morgan or Howard, FAMU, send them to Harvard and Yale. And like Carter Woodson said, Harvard ruined more Black men than bad whiskey. And it's true, but we tend to, the white way of raising a Black child is just to say, nothing wrong with this kid or the system. I want them to get the best out of the white system. They're not thinking at all about the cultural inoculation they should be giving their children. The second way I talk about is the gray way. And that's when, and many Black parents know this, they know there's something wrong with the white system that keeps putting Black males and Black females in special education, suspending them, expelling them in some cases, hitting them. Chuck calls them spirit snipers. They know something and they challenge the system. They go after the teacher. They go to the school and say, why are you suspending my child all the time? Because he says that Abraham Lincoln is a racist, which he was. Why are you doing that? So they challenge the white system or the white way, but they just, keep their child and try to protect their child as much as they can. And the third way is what I call the Black way or the warrior method, which is that you immerse your child in as much of a Black system as you can. You start maybe Saturday classes with Black families to give the child a cultural inoculation. I created this idea of warrior circles where you put 7 people in, children in a system so that they can learn what it is to be Black. It's funny, we will inoculate our children with, against rubella, whooping cough, all of that. But we need to give our child a cultural inoculation too. They'll have children listening to, there's nothing wrong with Mozart, and Beethoven was a brother, but Haydn and all these stuff. But we should let our kids know who John Coltrane is, Miles Davis, Betty Carter and other jazz. That's our music. And it's nothing wrong with hip hop except the stuff that's perverted, but we gotta make sure our children know a variety of music, reggae, blues, all of this. And I think that that way, that Black way of raising our children is the only way to have them successfully compete in the system of white supremacy. I teach, high school, and I can almost always tell the ones who are there to really say, I got to get my Black consciousness together. I can often tell after talking 10 minutes to somebody if they went to an HBCU or a white institution or who they're reading, what they're talking about. Maybe it's called Badar instead of, or something, but you can tell a child, parents ask me all the time if I'm recruiting, say, well, should I send my child to a HBCU or TWI, traditionally white institution? I said, look, if your child is Clarence Thomas, you need to send them to an HBCU. If they're Angela Davis, you can send them any place. They're prepared. So I think that, parents, have to give their child a black education at home. We got enough groups. I think we need to organize the organizations. We have to have a sense of community, that you have to be dedicated to that. The consciousness, which is what we just got through talking about. And see, our communities are divided at so many levels. We have enough groups in our communities. In most black cities like Detroit or Baltimore, we got 50, 60 groups, and some of them are doing the same thing. And the idea of cooperation is put some of those groups together. On a macro level, I think some of the countries in Africa, Malefi Asante has talked about this, some of these countries need to merge with other countries. Those are, European borders. Some black folk don't love black people. And so commitment is when you take a little bit more. We'll go to a black store and let's say somebody does something we don't like. You say, I ain't never gonna shop there anymore. But then they'll go to Walmart, get this, and still keep going there for stuff. So commitment is that you really love your community. I love black people. I spank them sometimes, they correct me sometimes, but you have to really love being a black person. And I think a lot of us aren't. One of my favorite is Martin Delaney. And he wrote this book called The Condition of the Colored People and all of this stuff. You read this guy back in 1840 and stuff like that. I said, this guy must have been living today, or something. He was wearing kente cloth. He was telling black folk to go back to Africa. He was clear about the system of white supremacy, very dedicated to his community, and tried to organize and did, several, back to Africa groups. I think that he needs to be studied more. And a sister that I still don't think gets enough credit is Ida B. Wells Barnett. Man, Ida B., you go, I was out in Boley, Oklahoma last summer. I wanted to visit one of these small towns, and Boley was a black town. Nicodemus, Kansas is another. There's a bunch of them out there. A lot of them are dying out now. But a lot of the people in those black towns that went there like at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, it was because of Ida B. Wells. They, these brothers, they were blood brothers. There was a white grocery store in Memphis, and these two brothers that were actually brothers opened up a black grocery store, right across the street from the white store. And naturally, black folk went to the black store. They hung these brothers. This was like 1892, 93, something like that. Ida B. Wells was living in Memphis, and she told black people, you need to leave Memphis and go west. Just told them that. And black folk left there and drove. The economy of Memphis collapsed. You see a lot of people like in Boley, Nicodemus, and other parts of Kansas and Oklahoma, their origins are in Memphis, but they went there because their ancestors went there because of what Ida B. Wells said. She was run out of town because of that. That's how she got to Chicago. So I think, there's been some documentaries on it, but if I was a filmmaker, I would make a movie about Ida B. Wells and Martin Delany, those two people, because I think they're two of the most powerful people. Ida B. Wells said, I think it was 1892 when she wrote her book, Southern Lynchings and All of Its Horrors. She said a Winchester rifle should be in the home of every black person. I think she said every Negro or something. And she said if she were she was determined that if one of those Ku Kluxers came after her, that she's going to take one with her. I mean, these are just powerful stories that we don't hear about. And I'm not saying we shouldn't hear about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and so forth. I think they like to present to us those who were, kind of turn the other cheek type of stuff. But we need to talk about some of these black folk that say, look, don't take none of this stuff. Do what you got to do to get your freedom. So Ida B. Wells, Martin Delany, those are two of my heroes and sheroes. And I think that black nationalism is not talked about enough among us. It's a lot of this, we're going to integrationism, and stuff like who you going to marry? I'm going to marry me a white woman, all of that, or a white man, And we need to talk more about nationalism. My generation believed in that stuff strongly. And it's less popular now because I think I mentioned Ida B. Wells and Delany, they were both nationalists, and I think Pan-Africanism is important. I don't like to see young people just saying, how can I get a more comfortable place in the system of white supremacy? And a lot of people won't say it like that, but that's what it's all about. I'm gonna get a corporate job, get me a, Porsche Turbo or something, get in the suburbs and I'm good. And if that's your whole goal, you got to make it like Steve Jobs, who was Syrian, said, you got to make a dent in the universe. And a lot of us we try to make the universe more palatable for us or more comfortable for us, and we can't do that. See, I feel that the problem between, and Francis has a chapter in there, the real problem between black men and black women is white supremacy. But see, we don't connect the stuff that's going on between us with that. It comes clear when in Ghana, when you see if you go to one of the, I don't like to call them castles, but the dungeons of Elmina and Cape Coast, you see that the female dungeon was placed right below the churches, and across from the female dungeon was the male dungeon. So after church, the Portuguese, the British, who took over those castles at one point, they would rape black women, the daughters, the aunts, the wives, the grandmothers of those men who were looking at this. And you can imagine the anger that they had. I'm saying that to say that the real problem is how this system of white supremacy has interfered with our relationships. That's why there is a lack of black men and black women who want to be together. And that ensues much of the anger within our communities. And I think we need to talk about that. I would just get black men and black women together and talk. We talk at the barber shop or at the beauty shop, but we don't talk with each other. And we've had these, Joy DeGruy and I did these seminars in London, all over the United States. And we need to talk with each other about what is the problem between us. A lot of brothers are trying to imitate patriarchy, and they don't have the same power as a white boy, but they're still trying to be that way. Some sisters don't understand the pain and the anger that black men have, and how can they talk to each other, and a lot of brothers have this macho attitude, especially a lot of young brothers, because historically we weren't able to talk freely about our feelings towards each other. And brothers need to do that. You know, sisters will go on these girl trips, not like the movie and stuff, hopefully, but they'll go on these girl trips together. Maybe we need some boy trips, and I ain't talking about the passport brothers that are going down to South America and stuff like that. But, you know, and even though brothers just say that, it's like this and what, you know, Black American women, they ain't no good. I'm gonna get me a Brazilian sister or one from, I don't know, some other place. It's because of the racism that we've experienced with each other. And we don't talk about racism with them. Neely says in his new volume, he has these 200 and some questions that Black folk need to ask each other. And man, some of those questions are hard. You know, have you ever had sex with a white person? If so, when, where, and how long? You know, all these kind of questions. I always tell my students in my class, I said, the first thing you should ask on a date is what? And then students will think things like, well, Dr. Winbush, you know, where we going for the date? Where's the party at? Whatever. You got the liquor, you know, whatever. I said, first question you said, what do you think about white supremacy? You know, and if they say something like, what are you talking about? I don't understand. But if they're engaged in that, that's somebody you should keep an eye on. You know, that's a good prospect. So I think that we've got to encourage dialogue among Black men and Black women about what is our, or who is our common enemy, and what do we do to put a bulwark, you know, against them. I mean, I have this habit when I see a young Black couple walking hand in hand or with their baby or whatever, I just go up and compliment them. That's just like a little thing. I say, man, y'all just make a beautiful couple. You know, keep it up. I think we got to do things like that on a very micro level to encourage love between us. And a lot of times we don't do that. You know, hip hop started off, it was fun at first. And like in '88, I remember, you know, Sugar Hill Gang. You know, it was just like, you know, it was good. It was like fun stuff. Even early Will Smith, when he did Summertime. But then there was a serious side, you know, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. And I remember when The Message came out in about 84, 85, right around in there, man, people started paying attention to it. And white America started paying attention to it. And I think, and I know that all this conspiracy theory, but music is something that really is so indigenous to Black folk all over the world. The drum, Black folk, they'll sing 4-part harmony in Accra, Ghana. And hip hop has penetrated every aspect of, you know, Black culture. I think the evolution of it is that the government, and I'm sorry to, you know, I ain't sorry to say it, Jewish executives like Lyre Cohen, I don't know if you know who he is, but these guys have taken over. That's who Jay-Z answers to. And I think right now that it's been used against us. The political hip hop like Dead Prez, Public Enemy, you know, Grandmaster Flash, that old school hip hop, it's rare that you have that stuff now. You look at R&B, disco, all of this music, which are, you know, house music, you know, whatever. Hip hop's been around 50 years. And I ask myself, why has it stayed here? It's a genre in and of itself, which is nothing wrong with that. But it's like it's here to do something to us, not only to make us dance, make us sing and all that other stuff, but it's almost like it's a poisonous part of it. I looked at, what's his sister from Memphis? Gorilla and Sexy Red. And man, I know the early founders of hip hop, and I know everything evolved. We had dirty music during, when I was, before I was born, believe it or not. But see, it left something to the imagination. This stuff nowadays doesn't leave anything to the imagination. It's really, what's his name? Tyler, the Creator. I saw this video with him about 5-6 years ago where he eats a roach and hangs himself at the end and stuff like that. That stuff is nihilism. And so I think it's serving a purpose beyond Little Nas Red. What's his name? Little Nas X. I mean, Little Nas X has a picture of him doing show with the devil. That's sick stuff. It's pornographic. But behind all of that, the Greek term Deus ex machina, are Jewish executives making money off of demoralizing and denigrating our women and our men. And then it's culminating in stuff like what you see with P. Diddy, and stuff like that. And a handful of people will speak out against it, like Cat Williams did. But that's rare. Now they want to do Sexy Red, Nicki Minaj, Cardi B. She doesn't know how to talk, but and they're millionaires off of this stuff. They're making money off of our misery. Some of this stuff is unhealthy. I ain't trying to fat shame or anything like that, but what's the sister, Lizzo. That's unhealthy. That's unhealthy. And if you say it's unhealthy, you fat shame. Well, yeah, I don't know what you call it, but so I think that a lot of this stuff is poisonous. It is, I think it's orchestrated by, white people who are making money off of us. Dead Prez did an album, and on the cover on the album, they took it to their producer or their company, I think. And they had a black man with a machine gun, white people. And they said, we can't do that. Next week they brought one where a black man, other black people, they said they would do that. But they didn't do that. They know what they're doing. It's a consciousness. And now it's like I said, it's just on cruise control right now, autopilot, because we're doing it ourselves right now.